So you have this Hit Record Joe little mini tour coming up next month.
Oh, yeah.
And it's landing in Richmond, Virginia and Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, do you think visiting those places after having done this film, is it going to have just a whole new weight? And
Sure. Well, we shot Lincoln in Richmond. So I actually spent a bit of time there. So it'll be great to go back to Richmond and do
so
our show.
I would
for
imagine
sure.
anytime you're there now, it's like, I mean, I've been there and I'm not necessarily thinking about the Civil War when I'm there, But
Sure.
I would
Sure.
imagine it's...
Well, I haven't been back since we shot.
Yeah.
And clearly it was at the forefront of my mind when we did shoot. So yeah, it'll be great to go back.
Yeah. For me, I always think that one of the challenges of a biopic like this or any sort of period movie that's so steeped in such well-known history, the challenge becomes what's different about this take on it, or what do we learn this time around that we haven't learned in seeing this story told? In your mind, what were some of those things that this Lincoln film accomplishes that are new?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's not just a Lincoln biography. It's focused on one particular moment in history, right at the end of the Civil War.
It's almost like a biography of an amendment versus a
Yeah,
person.
you could.
Yeah.
You could almost call it that. Yeah, because that's what it is. It's all about how they were trying to pass the 13th Amendment and outlaw slavery, and it's a fascinating political intrigue, really, and a great drama. It's just great, intense, storytelling. It's not so much about, well, I pledge allegiance to, this great president.
Yeah.
It portrays him as a human being embroiled in this really intense plot. It's interesting because, nowadays it seems obvious slavery should be outlawed. No human being ought to be a slave. Back then it was really controversial, and Lincoln was receiving opposition from all sides. There were the people who wanted to keep slavery intact. There were also people, who were more progressive than he, who were pushing for ideas like black people having the right to vote, or people of different races having the right to get married. These were ideas that were so controversial and revolutionary back then, even though they seem obvious today.
And it feels so oddly familiar right now.
Yeah,
one can only imagine the movie 100 years from now. People will be
right.
watching going, really? People weren't allowed to do that?
Yeah,
100
no, that's
years
really
ago?
true. And Lincoln had to make those compromises. And I think that's really telling that, he knew that if he supported these ideas, which were considered too far, too radical, he would lose all of this support. And then he wouldn't be able to pass his amendment, and everything would just be stalemate. So I think watching him do that wheeling and dealing, make those compromises, and suffer that criticism is really telling.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of through lines that are, parallels with things happening today, whether it's like the shady lobbyists who are, in this film they happen to be doing something noble, but they're shady lobbyists
Yes, they are.
promising people jobs and whatnot, nevertheless. And also, I thought it was interesting that the film touched on the idea that Lincoln, suspended a lot of civil liberties during a time of war. And, it gets its hands dirty, this movie, with some of the things.
It does, and that makes it not only more real, but a more fun movie to watch, I think.
And you get to play somebody, while clearly a historical figure, is certainly less well known. And it's, did you feel that gave you a few more liberties with your performance? Whereas, obviously Daniel Day-Lewis has to wear the stovepipe hat at some point. Like, you could probably get away with, wearing whatever, and no one's going to say.
The award, I mean, I guess probably general audiences wouldn't have, but as far as historical accuracy, everything was pretty meticulous on this movie.
Yeah.
As far as all those details, hair, makeup, wardrobe, the sets, everything, the grammar. Tony Kushner, the writer, brilliant writer, and he was pretty, knowledgeable and intent on making sure the way that we spoke was in line with how people would have spoken back then.